When you look at a monument or a memorial, what do you see? And what story do you remember? Today on Across the Fence, we're exploring Vermont's monuments and public history and asking, which stories are missing? Hello, Vermont. You've probably noticed by now that Vermont history plays a prominent role on this show. We love a bit of time travel on Across the Fence. Today, we're going to complicate that history a bit with an expert who's curious about whose histories get memorialized and whose have been marginalized or erased. My guest today is artist and community organizer Jen Berger, a lecturer in art and art history at UVM. Jen Berger, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Amy.
Hi, it's so nice to have you here.
Thank you.
So can we start by talking a little bit about your work as an artist in public spaces? For you, what is the role of art in engaging the public?
There's multiple ways and thought processes around it, but really I think the public space is a great way to bring people together. It's a great way to find ways to create a sense of belonging and connection. I think there's a great way to educate people or to have conversations, find common grounds, meet new people. I think art is an incredible catalyst for building community and also just engaging and amplifying.
And you've done a bunch of different projects around the community. We have some photos here from The Opposite of Hate is Mending, for example. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that project came out of, so it was, I did that in April of 2021. And so I had a friend that we would, this was like, we were kind of still in lockdown before that. And my friend and I would go for walks weekly. And, we would just go for walks because we needed the exercise. We wanted to be around other people. And so we were walking around in the south end of Burlington, and sometimes when there's an idea, it just kind of starts to percolate. And we walked by a site that's next to a green, that's next to Switchback on Flynn Avenue.
I live right there. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay,
yes,
so yeah.
Okay.
And if you might remember, there was like a metal frame that was in the middle of that for a really long time.
For a very long time, right.
And so there was a few different things that were coming. And my friend who I was walking with had a background as a seamstress, and she was telling me about some text that or something she was in, and the title was The Opposite of Hate is Mending. And the idea of mending for her was fabric, and for me, I was thinking about like the fractured society that we were struggling to figure out what was going on and making the best of things, but it was, global pandemic. And this title really stuck with me. And so I walked by one day and I was like, I think we need to do a performance here. I think this is a site that needs, that we can think about mending. And so what I was able to do was, I thought about the idea of a quilt. And so I was able to create quilt squares by using the laser cutter at the Generator Makerspace. So I don't remember how many there were, but they were wooden quilt squares. And then what the performance was that I would put them together as a performance, and then there was also live music. And so Matt LaRocca, who's also a lecturer at UVM, Randall Pierce, who is a local musician, and Polly Vanderputten, who's a local musician, Marie Hamilton, performed live. And then my friend Holly Shagnon choreographed a dance part with Trina Isley and Brooke Moen. And so what happened was we had these quilt squares, and there was, 40 to 60 people who showed up. This was around the time when we all had maybe just gotten our first vaccine.
Yeah.
It was April, so we were just starting to come out. Most of us hadn't seen groups of people in 6-8 months at this time. And so this was a nice big space to do this. And so I asked everybody to write up to 3 things on the back of one of the quilt squares about what they think that we need or what they need for mending in the future.
Well, did you think at the time, did you think of yourself as, for example, making a memorial? Did you think of that? Because now, and I'm going to bring it back to what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're talking a little bit about, is monuments and memorials, and the idea of how do we capture memory and experience and then put it into an artistic form. So did you consciously think
didn't
about doing
actually,
something
no,
like that? Not at the
I
time.
didn't, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the current project that you are working on too at UVM, it sort of has its roots in the pandemic as well, right? So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was thinking about public art and public space. And I was also thinking, it was in 2020 after George Floyd was killed, and we saw across the country, across the world, there was topplings of monuments, specifically Confederate monuments or monuments related to any colonization. And so it became really clear I started thinking, just about what we put in public space and how it has the opportunity to create harm or it has the opportunity to create care. And so I was really interested in diving into this. I got a grant to have the opportunity to dive more into this question, and it became so clear through the lens of monuments and memorials, thinking about the impact of public art. And so I stayed with this question through that piece of art, through other pieces of art that I've made. And then I've just been going to conferences and meeting with people and learning so much about that. And I was coming back from a conference and I was like, I have all these ideas of what I think the monuments in Vermont are, but I actually don't know. I don't have data.
Right. Yeah, you have to kind of query it a little bit and go and test some of your assumptions.
Exactly.
And I think, so tell us about the project. So you're working with a bunch of students. It's a 3-year project.
Yeah, so it's funded, generously funded through the UVM Humanities Center. So it's a 3-year project. So the first year that we're finishing up at the end of June is doing a statewide audit of the monuments and memorials. And we created a scope of what that is so that we had...
Yeah, quickly, what makes a monument or memorial? What is, how would you define it? This is actually not a trivial question. This is an important piece of the research.
And I think this is, there's no right or wrong, there's no one answer. To me, a memorial can look like anything, right? It could look like a stick that somebody puts on the side of the street because they were marking something, right? It can look like a memorial that we think about, like the Vietnam Memorial, or we think about like even the memorial in Vermont on the side of the highway. And I think monuments, often we think of them as these big marble or some other statue, bronze statues. They are commemorative.
Yeah.
But I think, usually monuments are memorials, but not all memorials are monuments.
It's like the square and the rectangle.
Yeah.
So in the first year, you've had a group of students, and that's been like that. The first challenge is identifying all of these across the state, and you're going county by county and coming up with a record. What have your students thought about the project so far?
I think they're really excited. For a lot of them, it's an opportunity to get off campus. It's an opportunity to see Vermont. Some of them are from Vermont, and they're excited to dive in. Some of them just want to learn about Vermont. I think they're starting to see the public landscape through a new lens.
And so they've been doing some photography themselves, and then sometimes they also have to find photographs online. We have, there's some images. We've got some images of some of the monuments and memorial that your team has documented, and they run the gamut. I find myself looking at them and thinking, what do they mean, and that's, I think, what's happening now in year 2, right? Because you have to go from observing the monument to then thinking about what is being memorialized.
Correct. So at the end of this audit, the idea is that we'll have photographs and information about monuments and memorials in Vermont within this scope. And then in year 2, we're going to put together different focus groups across the state where people can analyze the data. So I'm hoping to do both on and off campus and have some that are hybrid, so that we're getting really a mix of different perspectives and different histories and different stories that are informing the analyzation of that. And then while we're analyzing what that story is, I'm also going to be asking what stories are missing. And so the prompt, the scope of what we're looking at is what has something that has a presence in public space that commemorates a person, place, or event that has a significant impact to the public history of Vermont. And so within that scope, what are the stories that are not being recognized in public space? So that'll be year 2.
That'll be year 2. What have you noticed so far about what types of stories we are capturing? Like in that that series we're looking, because I went through the history pins. Some of them were interesting to me, like a lot out of Barrie because of the marble quarrying. So related to both the industry, but also to major figures, but also related to the Italian community there too. Like, what do we notice? What do you want people to see and think about when they look at these types of memorials and monuments?
So I think there's so many things, right? So some of them are memorials or monuments that are human form. Some of them are form of something that relates to the event. So I think what we're trying to do is have a critical lens of which to look at it and make this start to understand how did this get created? Who decided to do this? Who paid for it? Why is this something that's going into public space? So I think those are some of the questions that we're starting to ask, and students are starting to think about as well. And they have to do research on those particular questions.
Because then that's what also starts to open up the space then to say, what have we not included? Some of the things that I noticed, so obviously a lot of war memorials, right? I mean, it's like, have you noticed trends in the types of things that we tend to have more memorials or monuments for?
Starting to, so we're still reviewing the information,
Yeah.
and that was.
I keep pushing her. She's like, okay, we're in year 1 still. Come on.
It's great. No, it's great.
Give me a minute.
I can share what we have found so far, and so yes, a high percentage of war memorials, and also and also homes, right, or buildings have been, and I think because of the history of Vermont and how we are, that has been something, and then because of the entry point, the scope question. We were finding that there was a large number of monuments to people from Vermont that have contributed significantly elsewhere. And so while we're not changing the entry, we are considering it or creating a second category because we don't want to exclude that from that is part of the public landscape. So what does that actually mean about who we're commemorating in Vermont?
And so you envision there's going to be focus groups.
Yes.
Why do you want to get Vermonters involved in the project?
I mean, this is Vermont landscape, right? This is Vermont history.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I think is really fun, and I'm hoping to see more of, is that as students are going into local communities, that maybe they'll meet somebody who is related to a monument that they're looking at and get some story about that. And so, because of the size of Vermont and who we are, and we're such a relational state, I think Vermonters need to be involved in thinking about that, and also adding their own experiences to that conversation.
Yeah, lived experience, family experience, their own knowledge, absolutely. Then what happens after the focus groups and talking with the public? What's in year 3?
So year 3, at that point we'll have a list, hopefully, of absences of what's missing, what we see, what Vermonters have identified as not being present, and then we'll do a call to artists for people on and off campus to create an art show where people can make art to fill in those absences. Doesn't have to be a monument or a memorial, it could be a poem, a painting, lots of different options at that point. We're kind of working in that direction, but that's what I'm envisioning, is being able to speak to those absences through creative means and then documenting those so that we do have a monument of those absences.
That is so beautiful. So if your ears perked up at the idea of being in a focus group to talk about Vermont's monuments and memorials, you can contact Jen through the email address that is right there on your screen. That's the Vermont Memorials Project office. There you go. You've got it. You can read it. We also made a custom link to the project's historypin.org site where you can check out the ongoing curation of memorials and monuments, because there's a lot of really interesting things out there.
There is, yeah. And just to say that is ongoing, it is not complete, and there are some things that will come out, so it hasn't been fully curated yet, so that is not set in stone.
Work in progress.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been fascinating. I'm going to new eyes all over the place. And as always, thank you, Vermont, for learning and exploring with me today, and thanks to the team that makes Across the Fence possible. I'm Amy Finley. This is Across the Fence. Come back and let's learn and explore again tomorrow.